How are we doing, peeps? A new investigation here. So everything they teach is not quite right. It's an incomplete theory. It's getting there, but it's not quite right. I'm going to introduce some new concepts in this video that you don't know about, including regarding the Ice Age theory, including regarding geology, including regarding when the flood may have been. This is all a ruse from the air. It's interesting structure. This Catastrophe, I visited both, and I noticed I made videos about this, which you can watch. There is a layer of mudstone on each, sort of encrusting each. Now these could have been formed from the desert dust blowing onto them, of course, mixing with the water. It does rain torrentially occasionally. But what I noticed was, especially at Catastrophe, was a sort of mudstone conglomerate, something which wouldn't have formed over time, but suddenly. And the fact that you have Ayers Rock and Catastrophe in almost the same location and almost looking the same, it makes me think, well, were these actually formed through a catastrophe at a similar time based on a similar microenvironment around the area, around both of them, which no longer exists, hence now they're just breaking down. In other words, a flood. Now, it has come to my attention recently, very recently, that basically the entire of geology is based around using any other explanation but the flood in order to explain things, which of course makes its explanation slightly erroneous because they're based on the political view that we can't talk about the flood. So therefore any catastrophism must be rejected as being unscientific and biblical. And yet I don't see how much of geology can ever have formed without catastrophe. Things form in catastrophes in biology, for example, and that is well known. It is called punctuated equilibrium. New species form in catastrophes. But for some reason we can't have rocks and geology forming in catastrophes. I'm sure not all geologists will agree with everything that other geologists will say. That's fair enough. But if it is the case that geology has been formed around rejecting catastrophes, then I'm afraid it's going to be wrong. And then we come to the flood itself, and the flood is a big problem because everyone is downplaying the flood. Even the people who are looking for a global flood downplay the flood, and that is not quite correct. So let's get into the video. So here we have post-glacial sea level rise, and what people have always been saying is, and why Graham Hancock says 10,500 BC, you can see from this it's sort of the midway point in a global flood of sorts. Basically since that time that the sea level's gone up 50, 60 meters. Meters, not feet, meters. Now, to me, this rise over 2,000 years of, say, 60 meters, it's not fast enough to be the same as the floods in the Bible, in the Sumerian, in the Babylonian, in the worldwide things. In those texts, people were taken by surprise, and only someone who had been forewarned to build a boat survived. And assumingly thousands of other people. This isn't fast enough, but note that, and everyone knows this, that it does fit the flooding of Atlantis according to what the Greeks said about Egyptian record. The dates kind of fit, don't they? They kind of do fit, which I find very interesting. So I don't think this is the flood. This is one of the floods, but I don't think it's the flood. And of course the Egyptians, in the Egyptian flood mythology we have Atlantis, implying that the people who sunk in the Atlantic, some of them survived and went to Egypt, taking the story with them. Now let's continue to new concepts. Was the Grand Canyon created by flood? One creationist I was watching, there's a Leonard Nimoy doco you can watch online, and he talks about the flood, and there's a creationist, American Creation Institute or whatever it's called, and he's saying there's not enough energy in that river to generate the Grand Canyon, hence it's done in a flood. Geologists say, well, no, that's not a flood. No. They've explained away everything by putting it a very, very long time ago, hundreds of millions of years. Everything's done hundreds of millions of years ago, and therefore we don't need to explain it as a flood. And that lots of modern geology seems to be based on that. But when we come to the Ice Age, something very interesting happens. You might think that the Ice Age is a rejection of the flood and a replacement of the flood theory, because they said that the rock striations which were supposedly explained by the flood are actually explained by ice sheets. And you might think to yourself, well, they're rejecting the flood. They're not. Ice Age is based on the flood because they needed to explain all the water. So to explain all the water, they had to have these giant ice sheets. They had to have something they could comprehend, something they could visualize in their minds. So they came up with the idea, it seems, of having gigantic ice sheets over land masses. Whether this is true or not, I kind of have my doubts, because it would have turned Europe into an uninhabitable tundra at a time when Europe seems to have been well and truly inhabited by thriving Stone Age, or not thriving, Stone Age cultures. So I do wonder a little bit about Ice Age, and I do think that a lot of what they call Ice Age may in fact have been axial tilt of sorts. Tilt the axis in a certain direction, and certain places become the pole. The pole has simply shifts. And in fact, the Ice Age theory and the pole shift theory don't seem to be compatible, because the pole shift theory would explain the shifting of ice sheets as a shifting of the Arctic, would it not? Without having to talk about changes in global temperature, would they not? And in fact, you got to think, if there was sunken Doggerland and all this, wouldn't it have been extremely cold to live there? And yet, this was supposedly a very populated country according to the Egyptian record. So I really do wonder about a lot of the information that we're being presented with, because the history doesn't tally with it. And I don't just mean history from one country, which, could easily be. I'm talking about all of history and I'm putting all the pieces together. I'm trying to. Ice Age is based on the global flood. I think the Ice Age theory was invented to explain the global flood as ice sheets, water coming from the ice sheets. And yet, there's different ideas. Here we have the view that there was a rise of 60 metres in the early Holocene. In other words, science is supporting the Atlantis story, sort of, and supporting the theory of a global flood. But to me, that's too slow. And that's not what's being described. So the whole thing is being downplayed. The Annals of the Kingdom of Ireland. So after the flood, and this is something very interesting here. Look at this. Right. Basically, the land of Ireland, according to the ancient history, which survives, was fairly plain, but then locks broke out from the ground as springs and suddenly had a lock there, according to this. And you can read that here for yourself. The locks erupted and they were created, basically. This is when the locks were created. A lake eruption, inundation of the sea over the land, locks breaking out. The water's coming from the subterranean places, and that's what it says in the Bible regarding the Great Flood. It actually says that waters erupted from secret subterranean places in the Bible, creating a global flood. Now, I've suggested a shrinking Earth hypothesis. If the crust is crushing down, and water is has nowhere to go, it spills out over the land as one possibility. If there is water in the mantle, which there may be, I think recently they're saying there is, and the earth changes size, that water has nowhere to go except flooding the land. So the geologists have tried to explain away everything very simply. Oh, there's an ice age, and therefore we don't need the pole shift. Oh, there's an ice age, and therefore we can get rid of the flood, but we also need the ice age to explain the flood. Okay. Many people were skeptical of ice ages, such as Hoyle. If you read Hoyle's book on ice, he was very skeptical about it. He didn't put too much faith in the Milankovitch cycles. He said the Earth's still getting the same amount of energy, whether it's bouncing it back into space or not. Whether the ice is facing the sun or not, yes, it might have an effect. Yes, it might not have an effect. But the Ice Age theory itself, if you didn't need a flood, maybe you wouldn't need the Ice Age theory. And if you don't have a shrinking Earth, if the Earth isn't shrinking, well, you'd need the Ice Age. But what if the Earth's not shrinking? Do we not need the Ice Age theory anymore to explain the flood, or to explain conventional explanations of the flood? So I don't think the flood was 10,000 BC. I think it was earlier. So, and I think it was perhaps 30,000 BC when possibly the dinosaurs were wiped out by carbon dating. So and this is the thing, every single one of these flood hypotheses, do you notice they're all downplayed? They're so downplayed. It's remarkable. It's like, oh, it's just the Black Sea. Oh, it's just Babylon, a river in Babylon. Oh, it's just this. Oh, it's just that. And by downplaying, maybe they're trying to make the Earth more comfortable. But according to the ancient history and all the mythologies, sorry, it was very uncomfortable. The whole planet submerged under a flood. A few thousand survivors. Lots of flood stories. Another possibility is 70,000 BC. Humans almost vanished from the Earth. So we're looking at a massive explosion, says Harvard biologist. Basically the Toba supervolcano. Could that have been associated with something that occurred? But this is what I think it may have been. Around 30,000 BC. You have... It may have been the perfect storm, because you have this we think it looks like a space bombardment. They're called Carolina Bays as if they were lakes. Or was it even both? Could it have been both? There are rivers going through the area, as you see. Many species, megafauna, died out in this time. It was a mass extinction event of sorts, or an extinction event. Is this when the biblical flood was? Yeah, after the flood. I'd like to read you something. I've got this book here. Poems of Heaven and Hell from Ancient Mesopotamia, Penguin Classics. Who built that? Yeah, it's not built by humans according to the Babylonians. It's not built by us. It's built by Anunnaki. When universal law was set up, this is after the flood, and gods allotted their calling, then the Anunnaki, the erstwhile fallen, opened their mouths to speak to Marduk, he's the supreme god. Now that you have freed us and remitted our labour, that is, we don't have to slave for you, how shall we make a return for this? Let us build a temple and call it the Inn of Rest by Night, and we shall sleep at the season of the year, at the great festival, when we form the assembly, and we shall build altars for him, and we shall build the Paraku. So Paraku is their word for pyramid, which is similar to pyramid. The sanctuary, they call it. When Marduk heard this, his face shone like broad day. Tall Babel Tower, it shall be built as you desire. Bricks shall be set in moulds, and you shall name it Paraku, the sanctuary. The Anunnaki gods took up tools 1 whole year long They set bricks in mould, and by the second year they had raised its head, Esagila. It towered, the earthly temple, the symbol of infinite heaven. Inside were lodgings for Marduk and Enlil and Ea. Majestically he took his seat in the presence of them all, where the head of the ziggurat looked down to the foot. Now, the thing about the whole Anunnaki, they came before the flood, they came after the flood. The whole gist of the story is that they don't belong on Earth, and they seem to be settlers. They seem to be settling the landscape, and they don't know quite what to do, so they invent humans in order to help them work. But after 1,600 years, they're shocked at how quickly the humans have spread and how they've taken over the land. And they say, look, we've got to do something about this. Now, the Anunnaki want to have these workers, so they say they try and protect them, and Ea especially tries to protect them. So Ea becomes the supreme god, the moon or the earth, banished from heaven due to arguments. And eventually they settle on a flood, but they decide not to kill all the humans, just keep a few. Because the humans are quite useful, so let's just keep a few. And then we'll make a promise to the humans. Because we've killed so many, we're not going to do it again. That's enough. We've done enough. Yeah, humans have a really checkered history, I have to say. All this is downplayed. This is a tremendous story in here. There's more just on Wikipedia than in here. This doesn't go into that much detail, but humans sure have changed. At least I'll tell you that. If we used to look like gods, I tell you what, we sure have changed. So I'm thinking 30,000 or 60,000 BC. It's being downplayed. Geology formed as a rejection of the flood, hence it's not allowed to incorporate any sudden recent catastrophisms to explain geological monuments. I have a massive problem with the radiometric datings. I've tried to ask AI, explain the radiometric datings, explain why the half-life of uranium explains the age of the Earth. Just give it to me, a simple explanation. It can't do it. It's all based on assumptions after assumptions after assumptions. I don't get a straight answer from anyone. I got 3 uni degrees. I can't understand what they're trying to say. Lord Kelvin was bamboozled. He said he went from saying the sun is millions of years old to billions of years old because the geologists demanded it, and also because the radiometric dating seemed to support it at the beginning of the 20th century. I believe that radiometric dating really, truly created the 20th century historically, and was a quantum leap for us. But is it true? I have my doubts. And I believe nothing is truly as it is, as we believe it, because a lot of what's happened after the Enlightenment has been a rejection of traditional ideas, rejection of traditional knowledge and history. And I believe the historians have more to say to the scientists than they are saying. All right, guys, this has been an interesting exploration, a lot of past speculation, etc. I hope you have a nice day. Cheerio.